Hi and welcome back to Bike Speeds. This week we're going to service this lovely Cannondale Synapse. This has a few issues: very sticky chain, an incorrectly adjusted brake, and the handlebar angle that is completely at the wrong angle, and we're going to address those issues as well as service this bike. You've seen this bike on the channel before. This is actually my own bike. We brought this on Marketplace as a used bike to show you what you can get. Now you can see here, this front brake is actually pulling the wheel rim over to one side. So it's not central to the wheel rim, which means it pulls the wheel. It can cause a little bit of unevenness going downhill into a braking zone. The rear brake was loose. When I was actuating this one, I could feel it rubbing on the rim and then releasing if I pulled it a couple of times. So that's something I need to address. And the chain here was very sticky and very thick with oil. This bike is a 10-year-old bike and it has sat, well, all its life. It had done next to no mileage at all. I could see that when we picked the bike up, that this is a bike that's been brought and basically never used. So it's sat for a period of time, and that allows all the greases and oils to thicken up and not quite work as they should. You can see here on the cassette, it's not that dirty. There is just a film on there of oil, but you can tell from that cassette alone what little mileage this bike has done. Now, thankfully I could just knock the end off of that cable, which means I can pull that through the thumb adjuster to get the derailleur off. Then I can clean that component, but that makes it a little bit easier. You can see here, actually this was probably the dirtiest part of the bike. The rear derailleur here, built up with a little bit of grease and oil, but we'll clean that down. That was probably the initial oiling of the bike when it was new, and that's just built up on there. This bike's never been oiled, so you can also see on that front derailleur how there's a build up of grease on each of the plates. This bike has probably been cross-chained and has been ridden slightly wrong gears, and it's been rubbing against that and pulled the grease and oil off of the chain, and that's just built up and settled on there. We're actually stripping this bike right down because we're going to polish and ceramic coat this one, so we're going to take the chain set out of this one as well. This is the BB30 system that Cannondale actually introduced. It's quite a tight fit for that chain set, so we had to knock that out. Again, there you can see how little wear, how few scratches there are on that big chainring where it's gone big to small. Very little wear on there. So this bike was an absolute bargain for us in terms of wear on the components. We're going to do quite a bit of work on this bike over the time, changing components, swapping things out, and showing you what can be achieved with a bike like this. So this is the final component about to come off, the rear brake. So we'll take that one off and then we'll be ready to clean everything up, and we'll have ourselves the frame, and we can then clean and polish that as well. Now, with any used bike, you're always going to get their accessories left on the bike. So we had a few here to take off. So we had an old computer there. We hadn't been given the head of that, but people often use these things like lights as a selling point to the bike, has extras. But we've all got our own lights. We don't need those. They bulk up the bike. They weigh quite a bit. We'll just take all those off. I mean, like the rear light bracket there, but no light. We'll make sure all that comes off as well, just to sharpen the bike up a little bit and bring it back to original. Next up, I'm going to take the components apart that I need to. They're going to go into the ultrasonic cleaner and be cleaned up. So that's the derailleur. I'm also going to break down these chain rings on this chain set. I want to actually lubricate the spider of the chain set and clean those up as well nicely. It is my bike after all. I don't want it dirty, so I'm going to clean it up anyway. And then everything goes in the ultrasonic cleaner that I'm going to run through there. We run that for about 10 minutes. And then once everything's been through that, we'll wash them down with warm soapy water, which is what I'm now doing here. Once these components have been washed down and got that degreaser back off them, I'll dry those off with a microfiber towel, blow them out with an air line, make sure they're absolutely spot on before we start the lubricating process of those. So that's the components. We're also going to clean up the spoke protector. I'll explain why shortly, but that's also cleaned up. And then obviously these chain rings, you can see there, no wear on that whatsoever. I bet the chain's only been in there once or twice on that smaller chain ring. And I always love these lower quality, like the 105 cassettes, because they're chrome steel. They're none of the fancy steels to make them lighter. They always clean up so nicely. A chrome cassette always really looks nice when it's on a bike, and yeah, there's something to be said for that. Next up, we're going to do the lubricating process. So you can see there we've got 5 syringes. We're using our premium grease there on the jockey wheels, just to give those a little bit of lubricant, especially in the center where that axle sits through that. We want to make sure that that's really nicely lubricated. That will just help it flow and be smoother when it's on the bike. And we're using our thread locker here on the pivots of the jockey wheels themselves to make sure that they don't come undone. They're actually got thread locker on them from factory, so we want to replicate that when we do take them apart to make sure nothing comes loose when the bike's being used between services. So that derailleur is now perfect. We're also going to lubricate the thumb adjuster, so I'm using our anti-seize copper grease on the thread and then general purpose grease on the actual thumb adjuster itself. You'd be amazed how many of these I see where they're absolutely seized solid in the derailleur, and it's a real pain to either drill them out and tap them or deal with that. So this kind of preventative servicing is what I'm all about. When I actually service a bike, I'm always looking for the future service of the bike, the next service, how to make it easier for myself. That was the rear derailleur. Now we move on to the front derailleur. A little bit of premium grease on the spring to stop the rusting. General purpose oil on the pivot points, that will just help them actuate. Obviously as they wear and get older, that will need a little bit more of that. And brake as well, there's no harm in oiling the pivot points and the quick release. And then I'm also using our silicone grease here because there's a slider on that spring that slides in and out of a little plastic fitting, and that silicone will lubricate that perfectly. Brakes often seize when they've been through the road for a few miles. Quick release, again, general purpose oil on the lever, general purpose grease on the shaft, copper anti-seize grease on the threads, and that's perfect. And also with the chain set, again, I'm looking to future-proof my servicing. I'm going to put our anti-seize grease on the threads and then a little bit of general purpose grease on the spider itself, so that none of those metals bond together or corrode together. And next time I come to service this bike, it will make my job an awful lot easier that these parts have been lubricated. They will come apart so much easier and won't seize together, and it will just make it that much better next time. So I'm now rebuilding the chain set. I then torque it to spec in a cross pattern. I also then double torque these off camera as they all pull against each other when I tighten them up. Now I'm at the stage of washing and detailing the bike. I use a soapy snow foam which pulls loose dirt down off the bike. This makes sure all the rough bits of dirt don't get smeared around the bike with my brush. And then we're going to use our big softy nylon brush, a nice soft nylon bristle brush. A lot of the products you see in these videos we actually sell on our website, so the grease selections, the thread locker, this brush, the polishes we're going to use, the detailing stickers that we're going to use on this bike. They're all tried and tested items that we use in the shop day to day. We're not promoting for someone else, we're actually promoting for our own website because these are items that we use day to day in the early videos before we even had the website, and so we now sell those on our website. You can hear here on this frame, that's a very rough finish. This bike has sat for probably 10 years in a shed. That dust has adhered to that frame that even with washing off, it's just got that nasty feel to it. So we're going to use the Auto Glim Super Resin Polish. This is a lovely creamy polish that's got a real bite to it. You can really work that road film and film like this bike had on it. You can really work that off the frame. This bike is a gel coated frame and it will really work into that gel coating, draw off all that debris that's on there that doesn't just wash off the road film, that dust and all those ingrained tiny little things that are on there. It will work those off, and once we polish it off with a microfiber towel, it will begin to do its magic. The whole frame begins to feel shinier, wetter looking, smoother to the touch. I can feel that as I'm polishing it. And then I'm going to also rapid ceramic spray this one as well. The ceramic spray puts a lovely final coating on that frame to stop future dirt, water, debris, everything from sticking to the frame. It will bead up and run off of the frame without sticking quite so fiercely as that dust had over the years where this bike has sat. So once I've done that, you can see here now, it's a very audible difference, and also to the touch, to the feel. This bike is now lovely and smooth to the touch. It was almost like sandpaper. It almost felt like sandpaper before, and now it feels lovely and smooth. I'm really happy with that. You can see the reflection at the top of that Cannondale logo there. Totally pleased with the way the frame came up. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the rear wheel. We do one wheel on camera. We've actually already done the front wheel in this instance. But what I'm doing here is I wash down the wheels, I fill the spokes, I can check the integrity of the wheel, I can dry it down the microfiber towel, get it all nice and clean, and then I can begin to rebuild it. So on goes the spoke protector. We're actually going to do a weight saving video next with this bike about what you can save in weight from a bike like this straight off marketplace with next to no cost at all. So look at that video when it comes out in the future. I'm going to put on that lovely shiny cassette, torque that up, and one thing I did notice was that the logo, manufacturer's logo, wasn't over the valve on this tyre. I'm going to just turn that tyre, get that Schwalbe logo over the valve, so that if you do get a puncture, you can locate where in the tyre that puncture was when you take an inner tube out the side of the road. Makes it a little bit easier, and also it just looks right and correct when I present a bike back to a customer with those logos over the valve. It's something I always do with every service that I do. So now we inflate the tyre to the specification. I'm quite a light rider, so I do these to 80. These have got tubes in them, and you can see here that the number 7 spoke on the non-drive side and the number 4 spoke on the drive side were a little bit incorrect. One was slightly too tight, one was slightly too loose. So once we've done that, you see here a visual representation on that graph there of where the tensions were wrong as it came in, and where I've got it now where the tensions are all correct right around the wheel, and it's now nice and true. That was something I could feel when I was doing that wash down. I could feel a couple of spokes weren't quite right, so that's why we checked that wheel. Front wheel also was absolutely perfect, so we're quite happy with the wheels now. Get that chain set back in. Again, like I said, it's a BB30, so it's quite hard to get that in sometimes. I had to give that a little tap and then put on the pedal arm, torque that up, so that chain set is now ready to ride. Going to use our anti-seize grease where the pedals go in. You note there that I've got a brand new set of Ultegra SPD pedals. We've gone from the plastic flat pedals that were on this bike when we purchased it. I wanted those because obviously I've got clip-in shoes, so our next ride will at least be clipped in. It'll be a little bit more comfortable for me riding it. On goes the front derailleur. We'll also just check the hanger bolts there, make sure that they're all nice and tight. On goes the rear derailleur. Thankfully we didn't damage that cable, so that can go back in. You may also notice, especially on the front derailleur, how I didn't shorten that cable. Again, we're going to address that in a future video. Now, one thing that always amazes me with these brakes on this early generation 105 here is the length of this thread here for the thumb adjuster. I don't know why you'd ever need that amount of adjustment on your brakes, because you do have the Allen head for the cable pinch bolt just here that you can adjust between rides quite easily. You'd only need 1 or 2 turns on a ride to get that brake right, and it always amuses me how long they are. You notice there also I put our anti-seize copper grease on the mount. They're very prone to bonding inside the frame, so that was to stop that bonding. And again, I used a little bit of general purpose grease on the thumb adjuster itself there, so that that again won't bond and stick. Now, you may remember I had numbness in my hands when I was riding this. The handlebars were tipped up at quite a rate, so we want to actually flatten those off. So I'm going to adjust the handlebars. I'll probably ride this once or twice before I get the angle right for me. But I've dropped that down. That will help stop my numbness in my hands. And you also notice that when I was in the drops, I could barely reach the brake levers. You can see it's the tip of the finger. And also when the handlebars were up slightly, it was even harder. I could barely touch that brake lever. Now on this generation, it's as easy as changing that little rubber stopper there. I've changed it from a 3mm to a 10mm, although that was only appeared to be 5mm, but I assumed that was from the pivot of the brake. And you can see there how my hands now are right around that brake. So when I'm in the drops, maybe going downhill, I'm going to have far more control of this bike than I had before, and being able to actually reach your brakes will just give me the confidence to ride this bike on the drops far more than I did in our first ride. So everything's going back together nicely. On goes that chain. You can see how that chain is already far more flexible than with the oil that was on it originally. That had dried out. It made the chain very thick. It was causing changing issues, and I felt like I was riding this bike through a bit of treacle really. It was a very slow energy bike. It didn't feel alive. So with the chain and everything working and being lubricated, this bike I know is going to ride completely differently next time I take it out. So check the gears there, everything's working correctly. Check the brakes, make sure they're square on the rims. Everything there is now working perfectly. So the bike now is a well sorted out bike, but we're just going to do a couple of details and frame saves really here. We're going to use our detailing and protection stickers for this one. We do these in an A4 sheet. We do these in various different colours. We're using black and white today. We've also doubled our colour range of these. So you can see they're different shapes there for different applications, different areas, and the large one in the centre that you can cut to shape. And we're going to use one of the ones on the right hand side, the little rectangle there, to cover up that scratch there just as a detail. It will last far better than any painting and you could barely see it. And then as a protection, I've got a slight rub here from the cable. Thankfully this bike's done very little mileage, but I don't want that to get worse. So I'm going to use one of our white detailing stickers on here to protect that area from getting any worse. And then when that sticker wears, I can just peel that off and replace it without doing any damage to the frame. Now we can work our way through the bike. We're going to torque everything up. You can see here the levers were a little bit loose, so they've been torqued up. The head, obviously we've actually changed the angle of the handlebars, so we need to check that they're correct. And now I'm going to look at the stem, and you can see here that actually it was very, very loose when I got the bike. So it's quite important to really have a service when you do buy a used bike, just to make sure everything is tight. I also lined up that cap, it had quite a bit of movement in it, and also the Cannondale logo in this handlebar end cap. We do plan to change the handlebars for a narrower set. These were a little bit wide for me, but for this video, for servicing this bike, I line all those little logos up because I will ride it between now and changing the handlebars, and they irritated me when I was out on it the other day, so we want to make sure that that's all correct as well. So we run right through the bike, torquing everything. I do a front to back check and adjustment when I do a service of any bike that comes in the shop. Everything is torqued to spec to make sure that it's absolutely correct. You'd be amazed how many things I find either too tight or too loose when I'm doing a service. There's never a service goes by where something's not quite right on a bike that I'm doing. That rear brake is now torqued up. You saw in the before shots how loose both the front and rear were, so that was a really good problem to solve. Saddle, absolutely perfect. And one final thing I had to address was this seat post clamp. The Allen key in there was rounded off. I'd imagine this was done when the bike was purchased and they've altered the saddle and not quite used the right size Allen head in there, and it got a little bit rounded off. I had a bit of a fiddle to undo that when I changed the saddle, so I'm just going to swap that out, put a new bolt in there, and now I know that everything on this bike is absolutely spot on. Give that a little torque as well. And finally I can oil the chain, so we're using a nice thin oil here. This will work into the rollers of that chain. It's the rollers that you need to oil. They act like a bearing. I see all manner of ways that people lubricate chains, but the key with a chain like this is just drop it into the rollers, be tactile with it, and it'll come up really, really nicely. So you can see here, very subtle before and after, but you need to look at the reflection of the paint. This paint is now popping. It will allow water and dirt to run off it. These components are now spotless. I like a spotless bike, so the bike is now absolutely spot on. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please do like and subscribe. Drop a comment about your past used bike purchase, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.